At issue this week, the Democratic ticket is set. Vice President Kamala Harris picks Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. What does he bring to the campaign, and how are Republicans going to try to define him? Plus, new restrictions at the state's emergency shelter system for migrants and families experiencing homelessness. Is it a necessary change or a harsh policy? Two state reps are here to weigh in. And we're going to catch up with Ian Cain, one of the Republicans running to take on Senator Elizabeth Warren this fall. At Issue starts now. Good Sunday morning and welcome to another edition of At Issue. I'm Corey Smith. Sue is going to join us a little later on. We start with the biggest news of the week, the presidential race. You know, a lot has changed since July 13th when former President Trump survived an assassination attempt. At that time, President Biden's campaign was reeling, fighting off calls from elected Democrats for him to drop out. And ultimately, he relented. Well, now we have a new Democratic presidential ticket headed by Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Harris made her pick last Tuesday. Walz is a former high school teacher and an Army National Guard veteran. As governor, he helped push through a progressive agenda, including laws to provide free school lunches to kids, legalize cannabis, expand gun control laws, and abortion rights, and much more. It is a record he is proud of.
My mom and dad taught us, show generosity towards your neighbors and work for a common good. I took it to Congress and to the state capitol, and now Vice President Harris and I are running to take those very values to the White House.
Now, Harris is hoping Walz's background will resonate with Midwesterners and rural voters. NBC 10 political reporter Matt Pritchard joins me. Matt, you've spoken to a lot of Democrats about this pick, progressives, moderates, elected officials, voters. What are they telling you about the selection of Governor Tim Walz?
Well, Democrats, I think, see this as a very safe pick for them. Basically, Walz checks a lot of different boxes for Harris, especially speaking to that Midwestern sort of portion of the country. He also has a lot of things that might appeal over to Republicans, including being a gun owner, despite the fact that he weighed in on gun reform as governor, and also being a veteran himself. Now, Republicans on the other side see him as more radical. They believe that portions of the things that he got passed there in Minnesota, whether it be abortion or whether it be gun control, is a problematic thing for this Democratic ticket of trying to bring over moderates, to bring over Republicans to that side. And so you can see both sides trying to frame this for how their candidate will need it going forward.
Well, some may see Walz as maybe the safe pick. They saw Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as maybe the necessary pick. She needs to win that state in order to win the election. What do you make of those arguments?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, as you mentioned, Shapiro there in Pennsylvania, a state that she absolutely needs to win once we get into the general election. But I think we came down to how the two candidates just vibe together. We heard that a lot, that Harris and Walz, they basically get along. They seem to really enjoy each other's company. And apparently that dynamic wasn't present with Shapiro. And I think if you ask Democrats, they'd like to have a ticket that seems united, that seems like they get along and that they complement one another instead of having someone who might be trying to steal the limelight from their candidate.
So we've already seen Republicans trying to define Tim Walz, attack him. They're coming out with nicknames like Tampon Tim, pointing to a policy that he signed to put feminine hygiene products in boys' and girls' bathrooms. We've seen J.D. Vance go after his military record. Do you think these attacks are ultimately going to stick as they continue to try to define both him and Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I don't think these attacks really are going to have that staying power into the election that Republicans would like them to have. I think, when you look at these two tickets right now, J.D. Vance has certainly had a problematic move out into the public sphere. He has to just try and bring confidence to his candidacy as the vice presidential nominee on the Republican side. I think that's what people want to see from him. And hearing attack lines right now, I don't think are landing. Right now, all the momentum is on the Democratic side. Republicans need to try and shift that over.
Well, a lot changed before you went to the RNC. Now a lot has changed before you head to the DNC. Speaking of which, Matt, Sue O'Connell, and Glenn Jones all going to head to Chicago next week for the Democratic National Convention. They'll have live reports and analysis and many conversations with local lawmakers. Now, after the DNC, the next big event is going to be the first debate between Vice President Harris and former President Trump. It is going to be held Tuesday, September 10th. In Massachusetts, the cost of running the state's emergency shelter system through the next fiscal year is expected to cost more than $1 billion. So the Healy administration has once again changed rules for the system. Under the new policy that went into effect at the beginning of the month, migrants and homeless families living in state-operated overflow shelters will be limited to just 5 days. Some families have already been given eviction notices. Also, families who choose to stay at one of those shelters will be required to wait at least 6 months before they can qualify for placement at a longer-term facility in the shelter system. And for long-term shelter sites, the state will expand its priority list to include families with veterans or families who become unhoused due to a fire or a natural disaster. Now, those rules would be relaxed for some families for up to 30 days, including those who are close to securing housing. Joining us are two state representatives following the migrant situation closely. Democratic State Rep Erica Eiderhoven of Somerville and Republican State Rep Marcus Vaughn, who represents part of the town of Norfolk, where an overflow shelter is already operating. All right, so Governor Healy says all these policy changes are being made because the state is out of shelter space, can no longer afford the current size of this problem. Here she is late last week.
Ultimately, what we're trying to do is get people working, get people out of shelter. And we also need to free up shelter space for Massachusetts families who may be experiencing homelessness or fleeing from domestic violence or the like. What's happening right now is case managers are on site continuing to work with families to relocate families, and that's going to continue.
So when I hear that, it sounds like she's saying, look, no more room at the inn. We can't simply afford anymore to house these families. Your understanding of that assessment, do you agree with that assessment from the governor?
I mean, I think it's clear that the cost is a real problem, but also the issue here is that what are we doing to actually solve the underlying problem? And what's happening, what I see this as, is that we're passing the buck to, other support services, and particularly our municipalities. And that's not going to solve the underlying problem. We need to ensure that we're actually helping people get stable housing, get employment, right? Be able to, get all of their issues and problems figured out. But to just say with barely 2 weeks notice now, right, in a 5-day notice, you're making families decide, like, are my kids and I going to sleep on the street? I mean, that's just purely moral and concerning and really deeply upsetting situation that we are in. And I just don't think that's who we are as Massachusetts or as the United States.
So the site's already operating in Norfolk. I know you were concerned even before it started operating in June. What have you seen since then, and what do you make of the governor's assessment?
Yes, so, obviously the entire crisis at the forefront, this is a federal issue. We were dealt with this hand very early on. About a year and a half ago, we started seeing, more NGOs, facilitate individuals coming to our state. And we were, I think, a bit caught off guard. I'm glad to see that the governor is now taking, further steps as far as mitigating some of the issues that we're having here. But as the representative stated here, I mean, we still have an obligation with these families. We can't just have families on the street. That 5-day limit will definitely lead to, we've already seen it as far as the previous week, families sleeping in front of Boston Medical Center. There's only so many third-party support services out there in the Commonwealth with limited beds. We're limited as far as affordable housing at this point. I just don't see where these people transition at this point, even given the fact that we're giving them vouchers, plane, bus, or train tickets to their sponsors that originally, vouched for them from the beginning. So it's something that we're gonna see the effects of it over the next week or two, and how this all shapes up. But we're committed to making sure that, again, Massachusetts residents are well cared for, while still caring for those individuals, asylum seekers, and individuals coming into our state that need support services.
So let's talk about space and money. As things stand today, do you believe that there is space in the Commonwealth to either open up more shelters or to house more families at the shelters that are already open?
Well, I think that draws to a really bigger question we have here, is that we have an affordable housing crisis in Massachusetts. And I think that's what I mean by the root causes that we actually need to address. Because even before the migrant crisis, we had 3,000 families with children out on the streets in Massachusetts. We have one of the highest, and Boston's the second highest homeless population among the major cities. That, to me, is an issue around affordable housing that we need to actually figure out where are people going to go. Because I don't, it's a misconception out there that people want to stay in shelters. No one wants to stay in a shelter. We want to get people long-term housing, but that draws back to this bigger issue that everyone is very familiar with, which is that living and people are spending 50, 60, 70% of their income on housing costs. There's this dire need. And while I'm very proud of the housing bond bill that we just passed, that the governor just signed into law, we need to do a lot more than that, right, in terms of ensuring that we have the affordable housing available. I think certainly, right, Massachusetts, we have space to welcome people, and that is part of our core values as a state. We just need to now move forward on actual long-term sustaining solutions rather than what I see this as a very haphazard, not well thought out. I mean, there's not really even a policy out there. Like if you think of the third party or with homeless advocates, physicians, people who work in mutual aid and individuals, nonprofits who are trying to help these people, we have no information about who these families are, where are they going, what is their situation, how can we help them? This has moved so quickly, and I think that's really the issue here, is that we need to be much more intentional and thoughtful about how do we get people permanent, long-term sustaining solutions.
Right. I think a lot of people will understand that, yes, the state is in an affordable housing crisis, but you're not going to fix that in the 5 business days that these people have. Is there other space out there? Obviously, you're housing folks in Norfolk. When you look around the Commonwealth, do you see other places where you might be able to have these folks go to, understanding that resources can't be everywhere across the Commonwealth?
At the moment, I realistically don't see any other scenario where we're able to house these individuals. I mean, even as far as last month, I think we were 800 on the waiting list, 800 individuals on the waiting list. We should never be in a situation where we have that many people in need on the waiting list for suitable housing, and especially emergency housing, as no fault of their own. So right now in the Commonwealth, no, there is no other space available, and it would take a Herculean effort at this point to basically drum up, the amount of space needed and suitable housing to house these people.
Do you think that is something the state could do, though, if it really wanted to find, yes, a somewhat short-term solution?
I mean, I think we have to get creative and figure out a solution here, because the alternative is much, much worse, right? We're going to have children and families sleeping on the streets. I'm proud of the fact that Massachusetts is a right to shelter law. It's something that we put in place 40 plus years ago in the 80s. And that's actually how we've now structured our shelter system, is that because of this law in the 80s, the family shelter system is managed by the state. There is no family shelter system managed by municipalities or at the local level. So the question is, if they're getting kicked out, where do they go? They really virtually have nowhere else to go, because the other shelter systems are for individuals. They're not for families. And it's because of this, this context that we live in. So I think that that's where we do need to figure out more solutions. Now, we don't have the immediate, this is where they have to go, but to say that, oh, we're just going to put them out on the street, it's not the right choice either, and that puts people in a really challenging position. I will argue, too, that we know from studies and what other countries have done and what other cities and states have done, that when you house people, you actually save money as a state, right? That is actually the fiscally responsible thing to do, that every dollar invested in shelter or housing returns double that in terms of economic return, in terms of people being able to get back on their feet and be able to be contributing members of our society. And so that's the kind of course, the long-term vision that we need to work towards. But putting people, and particularly people who have just faced eviction, right, now in this lurch of uncertainty, is not only harmful for those individuals and for those families, but it's actually harmful to our local economy, and it's harmful to our society.
On the money side of things, $9 billion in the state's rainy day fund. Should we tap into that?
No. As fiscally conservative as I am, we don't need to continue to tap into additional coffers for this crisis. I mean, obviously, it's unsustainable up until this point. It's going to continue to be unsustainable if we don't grapple with it at this moment and take onus of what we've created. Over $1 billion that's already been allocated. They're saying, potentially over $2 billion over the next couple of years. It's unsustainable, especially with the amount of revenues that are down right now in the Commonwealth. It's really unsustainable at this point.
What do you think? Should they tap into it?
I mean, I don't think we should be tapping into the rainy day fund. What I do think we need is sustaining forms of revenue. And I think that the fact that in actually Massachusetts we've cut taxes over the past 40 years, we have opportunities to raise progressive taxation where the wealthy and people most able to pay should be paying their fair share, and they're currently not, because we have an upside-down tax code for most of the income brackets. So there are opportunities for us to raise revenue. I'm disappointed that the governor, initially at the very first part of her term, that she proposed $1 billion in tax tax cuts. I don't think that was forward thinking in terms of what we could be doing with that funding, particularly because we know that that is actually the fiscally responsible thing to do, is to house people, to invest in social services, education, transportation. So I do think there's a lot of opportunities there to raise revenue. And I will also add that, there's also places in the budget to find this funding. We have some of the most expensive prisons and jails in the country, $130,000 per person incarcerated. That, to me, is not a good use of funding and should be changed. So there are options that I think the governor and the legislature can be working with, but we do need to think more creatively and more forward-thinking about how this funding can be best used.
Both of you, thank you so much for being here on that issue. We really do appreciate you taking the time. Rep. Erica Iverhoven and Marcus Vaughn, we appreciate it. Thank you, guys. All right, we are just over 3 weeks till primary day here in Massachusetts, and one of the Republicans looking to unseat Senator Elizabeth Warren this fall is Quincy City Councilor Ian Cain. He makes his case next. Welcome back to At Issue. In just over 3 weeks, Massachusetts holds its primary elections, and perhaps the biggest race that day is going to be the Republican Senate primary. Quincy City Council President Ian Cain is in that race, and recently our Sue O'Connell sat down with him and started their conversation by asking Cain about his background and why he's running.
Massachusetts native, only Massachusetts native in any part of this race, whether primary or final. Grew up in Quincy, went to the public schools, BC High graduate, Boston College with a political science degree in 2004, MBA from Duke University in 2013. I've got a professional background in venture capital and private equity across a number of spaces, including commercial real estate, energy, technology, and telecom. I've been in the Quincy City Council. I'm in my 5th elected term, 9th year. I'm currently the City Council President, and in my day-to-day, I run a nonprofit called Cubic Labs, which supports technology entrepreneurs.
So, of course, this is the question I ask every Republican in Massachusetts. What kind of Republican are you? Are you a Massachusetts Republican? Are you a Texas Republican? How would you define your Republican ideology?
Well, as I started saying, I'm a Massachusetts native. I certainly am a Massachusetts Republican by the dint of that I'm from here, and that those are kind of the models. I think I come from sort of looking at the presidencies of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Those are the people who I used to look to when I was a kid. But I think also what you've seen in especially the last 8 years is a dramatic shift in Republican and Democratic identity or allegiance or alliance. And the parties have shifted. And most people, I think, are seeking not only a party that might be able to assuage their a la carte issues that they certainly subscribe to, but I think that the Republican Party, especially in Massachusetts, is seeking to tip the balance a little bit from our uniparty control.
Why U.S. Senate? You're on the City Council. There are some steps in between there that you could run for. Is it the opportunity to run now, or have you always wanted to be a senator? No,
this wasn't a long contemplation to run for U.S. Senate. And, I'd asked the other candidates the same thing. Elizabeth Warren held no public office before running for this seat. My opponents in the primary election also have held no seats before. I think the greatest place to learn how to serve the public is at the local level. I'm constantly in the lives of my neighbors, family, and friends, understanding their wants, needs, desires, and expectations and representing their interests. There are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, so no better experience to have representing a city or a town to bring that perspective and experience to the federal government.
Let's jump ahead to the general election for a second. You've been critical of Senator Elizabeth Warren regarding some concerns that she's expressed about cryptocurrency, around the national security issues, the environmental issues. Are those not valid concerns? Do you share those concerns? Where are you around those issues when it comes to crypto?
So I think there's a lot to unpack in there. It's not just as cut and dried as those. There certainly are issues that she's presented that I do not agree with, I think, from an industry perspective and from an underlying technological perspective, which is the blockchain or distributed ledger technology. She's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And not only that, I think there is an agenda that she's trying to push, which certainly doesn't jibe with the decentralized nature of the technology itself and its sort of ability or want to disintermediate some of the big banks that she used to say that she was against.
Talk a little bit about some policy issues that Elizabeth Warren holds that you have a different point of view on or you disagree with completely.
Well, she's been totally neglecting the border issue. Right now in Massachusetts, we have become a border state. Illegal immigration has been at the top of mind of every single voter that I've talked to in Massachusetts over the past 5 months, and it's been a problem before. Now, largely this is being absorbed by the state, both through physical and financial burdens that Elizabeth Warren has been absolutely quiet about. Yes, there has been proposed legislation at the federal level that she's passed on twice. I also would have passed on on those pieces of legislation, not for the same reasons as her, but for the fact that it doesn't get to the heart of the problem, that we're currently not closing the border, adjudicating the backlog of processed people that have come over the border through illegal means, and trying to find a remedy to the situation that we're currently under in Massachusetts.
So to that point, the Biden administration had a bipartisan deal that would have been possibly the first legislation on the border in decades that was squashed, derailed by many reports by former President Donald Trump. I want to talk to you about the Republican Party and Donald Trump. Just recently, he has been on stage forwarding identity politics, accusing Kamala Harris of not being black or not being Indian. He's had a number of racist statements, election denials, and of course the January 6th riots and insurrection at the Capitol, which were concerning. How do you square off what he says and how he behaves as a Republican with how you would behave and act if elected to U.S. Senate?
Yeah, I'm not here to defend or any statements that Donald Trump makes. I'm not here to promote his candidacy for president. I'm here to displace a long-sitting member of the United States Senate that represents Massachusetts, and I don't think represents Massachusetts well. I think that, despite what the rhetoric that comes out of a person like Donald Trump's mouth, in a presidential election right now, which is not exciting to me. This is a reason why I'm running. This is to usher in the next generation of leadership. When Biden was the top of the ticket going against Trump, that's not an exciting race for me. I wasn't supporting either of them. And I also don't like what the Democrats have done in negating the 14 million votes that were cast in a primary election to just put Kamala Harris in that seat. I think that there's something very wrong about that process.
Are you okay with what the Republicans did in Nevada when they made a primary and a caucus that would basically ensure Donald Trump would get those delegates?
I'm sure we could go back and forth all day long about what you either like or don't like or prefer or don't prefer of politics that people play in particular states. I'm happy to have that discussion another time. Today, I'm here to present myself as an appropriate candidate, as a Massachusetts native who can better represent Massachusetts residents to the United States Senate.
Before you get to Elizabeth Warren, you got to get through John Deaton.
You're right.
Right? Okay, we had him on.
And Bob Antonelli.
Right, exactly. We had him on a few months back. Why should Republicans vote for you in the upcoming primary? He says he's skeptical of former President Trump. He's attacked Elizabeth Warren on some of the same issues you have. What's different between the two of you?
Well, John Deaton doesn't live in Massachusetts. He lives in Rhode Island. He might have taken a rental property in Swansea, which I think is pretty disingenuous. He also has a pretty salacious background. He's been giving out a book on the road that outlines his own self-admittance to statutory rape, illegal drug use, and a potential murder. And I don't think that's the quality candidate that Massachusetts residents are going to go for.
And I want to talk a little bit about your work on the Quincy City Council. Of course, recently in the news, we've all been covering it. The council recently approved an 80% pay raise for Mayor Tom Koch. He'll make $285,000 a year. That's more than Boston Mayor Michelle Wu makes, more than New York Mayor make, more than a lot of people who are in charge of a lot of big things in the public sector make. You missed the preliminary vote on the pay raise. On the final vote, you said, yes, I'm okay with that. How come?
I did. We were presented a study with a range of values of different positions like town managers and town administrators that apparently across this state that manage population sizes the fraction of the size of Quincy, that manage budgets the fraction of the size of Quincy are being paid upwards of $600,000 to do a job. And I would argue that for an executive compensation package for a population a size of 103,000 people in the city of Quincy managing a $425,000 budget with an over 2,000 person headcount, $285,000 is not egregious. And this has been an issue that keeps giving. There are many votes that people have to take that people are not going to be pleased with. I've done it for 9 years at the city council, and I stand by the votes that I take. There are certainly more consequential votes that I've taken that I stand by at the end of the day.
Do you think mayors and public servants are underpaid?
I'm happy to take a look at that. I know we assessed it based on the position that we were evaluating for an executive compensation, but I kind of can't give you. I'm not going to give you a blanket statement on underpaid or overpaid. But I do think that this does make a position like that more desirable for someone who might otherwise seek a job in the private sector.
If elected to U.S. Senate, what's your stance on reproductive freedom, on Roe v. Wade? Would you also look to ban a federal abortion across the nation, or would you work to open access, or are you fine with the states' rights issue part of it?
So I'm fine with the states' rights issue. I wouldn't seek to ban any abortion in this country from the federal level. I think the decision is handling in the states now. I'm also very willing to have a conversation about this. I think that this is a topic that people are very uncomfortable actually getting into the details around. And so, I know on an anecdotal basis, personally, I have not spoken with too many women about the subject of abortion.
A reminder that we also caught up with another Republican Senate candidate, John Deaton. That was a few weeks ago. You can watch that interview in its entirety on our website, nbcboston.com/@issue. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of At Issue. For Matt Pritchard and Sue O'Connell, I'm Corey Smith. Enjoy your weekend.